creative process with Third Coast Percussion and composer Tyondai Braxton. My name is John Kilkenny, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a second, but I want to share that this conversation is part of Mason Arts at Home, a digital programming initiative that strives to promote community through the arts, even during this time of separation. We have one more week of fantastic programming on the way, and we hope you'll join us for our future productions, as well as be with us for today. As I said, my name is John Kilkenny. I'm associate professor in the School of Music at George Mason and director of percussion studies there. I also serve as the artistic and executive director of the Sewanee Music Festival. And I'm thrilled to be here moderating this discussion today and excited to introduce our guests. First, Tyondai Braxton is a composer of electric and notated music. He's been writing and performing music under his own name and collaboratively with various groups since the mid-90s. He's a multimedia musician and artist and really creative force in our field. Among his many collaborators, he has worked with Philip Glass, the folks at Bang on a Can, the Kronos Quartet, the London Sinfonetta, and of course, Third Coast Percussion, who we're going to have join us in just a second. So I'd like to welcome Tyondai to our conversation.
Hi, John.
Nice to have you with us. So along with this discussion today, we are really happy to have David Skidmore. David is a performing member and the executive director of Third Coast Percussion. Third Coast Percussion is a Grammy Award-winning artist-run quartet of classically trained percussionists hailing from Chicago. They were founded in 2005 and since then have performed hundreds of concerts across the country, present an annual concert season in Chicago, and teach musicians of all ages and experiences all across the United States and around the world. They've commissioned dozens of new works for percussion by a wide range of composers. Just a few I'll mention here: Glenn Cochee, Philip Glass, and Augusta Reed Thomas. I'll share with everybody here that Third Coast Percussion, in addition to all of that, we are very happy to have them next year at George Mason University as artists in residence for the 2020-2021 season, which means they'll be spending time with us on campus. They'll be working with our students at the university, engaging with audiences all across the Northern Virginia, Fairfax region, and of course within the university. We're thrilled to have them with us as the head of the percussion program. I'm especially excited for this collaboration and really looking forward to it. So David, welcome to our conversation as well.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So today we're going to be talking about a piece that the Center for the Arts is co-commissioning. And the other commissioning partners for this work are the Sewanee Music Festival and the Boulanger Initiative and Carnegie Hall. So I'm going to now moderate the chat and listen and learn more about this piece and turn this conversation for now over to David and Tyondai.
Great. Thanks again, John. Hi, Tyondai.
Hey, David. How you doing?
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about you, talk about your music, talk about your percussion music, maybe specifically, and about this amazing new piece that you've written for us. I wanted to kind of start out by just having you tell us about your background. So I know my bandmates first heard you creating music with a band called The Battles that you co-founded in 2002, I believe. And then you've been putting out music under your own name, as John mentioned, for many years. The first of those albums that I got to know was Central Market, which is an amazing piece that I believe was premiered by the Wordless Music Orchestra at Lincoln Center. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us all about your background as a musician in sort of multiple worlds, maybe specifically your concert music, but maybe your other background as well, and how these different types of music talk to one another in your creative output.
Well, that's something that I kind of go back and forth with myself as far as how to interface with working in a lot of different ways, whether it's electronic music, generative principles within modular synthesis or loop-based music in electronic music, as well as notated music. And I don't know, I've been doing both for quite a long time. When I was like in my teens, I started using, I was a guitar player, and would play a lot using loops and guitar pedals and stuff, and kind of create layers of sound that would kind of be larger than the sum of its parts. Was at least that was the goal, and also to be self-sufficient. And you know, at a certain point, after I went to school for music composition, and you know, the weird conundrum there being trying to be self-sufficient and be able to perform by myself as a solo performer, and also wanting to kind of have some of the social element of working with people and collaborating with people. So I graduated and I moved to New York, and I co-founded the band Battles with a couple of other people. Was in that group for about 10 years, and then again started to kind of wanted to branch out more and wanted to write more for ensembles and orchestra, and really got bit by that bug and have really just kind of stayed in that zone since. But yeah, I mean, I still constantly go back and forth between writing orchestral or notated music or ensemble music, and also music that I'm making by myself electronically. And there's a lot of similarities between how I work in that way, and there's a lot of differences, and reconciling those differences is kind of like a life's work, maybe. You know, it's something that is, you know, you kind of find different ways to work and different shades of working when you're working in these different modes, and you kind of hopefully develop and you know, rethink what you're doing over time and get different results.
So even right now, we were actually chatting a little earlier, and you were talking about what you're working on right now, which is revising a large orchestra work and finishing up some solo electronic work.
Yeah.
What's it like to even work on those things simultaneously? I mean, do you find, you know, like taking advantage of the live performers on the one hand, or taking advantage of the sort of complete autonomy on the other hand?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I find for myself that it's actually hard to work on those things together, because the means of composing for each, you know, each way is so different, and you have to think so differently. At least for myself, I find it to be a real challenge, where it's kind of like Hunter S. Thompson talked about the concept of gonzo journalism, where, you know, he would go down, you know, when he was like immersed in like a particular story, he had to actually become one of the characters of the story to be able to kind of like properly immerse himself in a situation. I really relate to that, and I also relate to the unhealthy nature of that way of submersion. You know,
Hunter S. Thompson was unhealthy in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah, and hopefully brilliant too. So in a way that you can appreciate that fact that he was working in the scope. But that's the thing, is that it's kind of hard to just dip your toe in a way of working like that. A lot of the electronic music that I do is generative, which means you kind of set up systems in order to kind of, you know, have to unlock a way of working, or unlock a series of sounds that you could never get otherwise. You can't like notate for some of these sounds. You have to actually, you know, find ways of having these different functions get in dialogue with each other in order to kind of realize some of these sounds or forms. And then on the other hand, taking some of that way of thinking, internalizing it, and trying to find ways of extending yourself, extending your technique within your notated work. And so it's like a strange dance to go between, but it's also, I don't know, I've gotten a lot out of it, and it's still exciting to me to go back and forth. I find when I sit in one way of working for too long, it starts to become stagnant to me, and I can't see, you know, the only way out of it maybe is to kind of start working in a totally different way. So I think the pairing of those ways of working has been helpful.
And we should say that even when you're writing a concert work for live performers, you're very often, maybe always, incorporating electronic sounds as well. I know you did with your new piece for us.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of synthesizing those two ways of working. I find that when it comes to notated music, at least in the way that I'm having these things interface, I usually start from a place of notation. With Third Coast, I scored out the piece for percussion first, and then would come and turn around and try to find ways to interface, generative principles, generative electronic music within the piece. I kind of couldn't do that backwards. You kind of couldn't get that level of detail, or at least the way that I've been doing it. I would have to start with the notated first, and same with the orchestra or ensemble music. I would have to score everything out first, and then find opportunities or ways to interface electronics within it.
I'm particularly interested in the way that you blend percussion sounds with electronics for obvious reasons. As I mentioned, my bandmates and I have known your music for really a long time now, longer than we've been a band probably. But I distinctly remember an album, I think from 2015, called Hive One, that was the first time when we said, hey, this guy might be thinking on sort of a similar wavelength to us, because we heard, I admit I got that album and I thought, okay, this is an electronic album. And I only found out much later that there were actually live percussion sounds that are an integral part of the piece. Do you feel like there's a natural sort of kinship between the electronic sounds that you're making, the electronic sounds that you're making and typical percussion sounds?
Yeah, I mean, particularly I could say when I was doing the Hive music, I was really deep inside a lot of percussion music. Particularly, I was really obsessed with Edgar Varèse's music and the way that he was using percussion. He approached it in a way that was had a lot more to do with texture than with just an obvious rhythm. And even his rhythms, were in a lot of cases were so complex that it wasn't meant to be thought of as even if it was kind of like a rhythmic passage or something. It felt more as a texture. It felt more as like this drop-in texture within this larger, strange sound world. For a lot of electronic music, and particularly with modular synthesis, texture is such an important concept as far as what you're trying to synthesize, and it interfaces really well with these beautiful sounding percussion instruments. And a group like you guys, where there's so much attention to sound and so much attention to detail and the kinds of instruments you're using, you're thinking about sound. It seems to me that you're thinking about sound in that same way. And, it's in that way, just sonically speaking, it's easy to find the relationship between an instrument like a modular synthesizer and an ensemble like a percussion ensemble. For sure.
So I just sorry to interject real quick, just to make a couple of points. One, the Varèse thing is for me really, really cool, because I mean the long line of composers, and both traditional composers and everything that stems from that have been inspired by Varèse's music. I mean, we all, a lot of us are aware of the sort of the Frank Zappa connections and other composers, and it's really, for me, neat to hear that connection. And I wonder if you could, for just a second, talk a little bit about, from your perspective as a composer and as someone who's creating music with electronics and acoustic instruments, some of the challenges and perhaps some of the advantages of working with percussion and percussionists, rather, or as opposed to some other instrumentalists and other instrument groups. Not to brag too much on percussion right now. It's kind of where we are, right? So let's talk it up a little bit, and then I'll just remind everyone that's checking this out that there's going to be time at the end to take some questions. And so if people want to just drop any questions they have in the comments, we'll get to those towards a little bit. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, just like what I was hinting at the end, what I was just saying, the nature of the percussion ensemble, just as a start, is already an adventurous proposition. You know what I mean? Like right then and there, you're dealing with people that are thinking about sound in a way that might be a little bit outside, or maybe a little bit, I don't want to say deeper, but you're definitely opening the vocabulary as far as what has been traditional Western music, has been considered traditional Western music. And, you know, just when I went to Chicago a couple of times to meet with Third Coast and David and everyone there. And, you know, just those meetings right there just show the difference of the different nature of collaboration for something like a percussion ensemble, where we're going through these, you know, walls of instruments that David and the group has. You could see behind David, there's just a wall, and that doesn't.
We should tell everybody that that's actually your studio. It's not a fake like Zoom.
Not a Zoom background.
Yeah, I don't have nearly as cool of a background as Dave had in the conversation. So sorry, please.
No, and like, you know, when I would go to meet with them, you know, I think predominantly for the first couple of hours when we would go meet, it was just showing me the instruments that they have, showing me the different ways that they can play the instruments, showing me like collections of things, and saying, you know, we could use this as an instrument. You know, it's just like the idea of exploration. And, you know, I could say this, when it comes to, you know, I've worked with a bunch of orchestras for performing and stuff, and I've yet to have that experience where you walk into an orchestra and you know, the concert master violin says, well, you know, I could actually really, you know, put my bow underneath the strings and find, you know, that's not really the relationship that you have with ensembles usually, you know. And percussion ensembles may be just because of the nature of their open-ended, the kind of open-ended nature that they have, and the fully customizable nature of something like a percussion ensemble, it allows to think of writing for something like that differently and maybe outside of any kind of prescribed box. And I think that, yeah, I mean, you know, and Varese, he's credited for, you know, with ionization, he's credited for, if not the first, at least a very early, you know, a complete percussion piece. And I really responded to his music. He felt outside of, he first of all, he didn't feel conservative to me. He felt forward thinking. I really appreciated Varese's temperament as far as what I knew about it. He was an intense person. His music was very intense. He was serious without being dogmatic. And he kind of he has his own, he kind of formed his own sound world and sound philosophy. And I really appreciated that. Yeah, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah, we've been sort of introducing this idea of workshopping, and I want to we've got some cool videos and examples of your music queued up here, Tyondai. So since we're talking about workshopping right now, maybe I'll just introduce a clip that's actually us workshopping your piece with you in our studio.
How convenient that you have that ready to share. How nice that worked out.
Very prepared. So this is actually a really small sort of microcosm of the type of workshopping that Tyondai and Third Coast Percussion did together. But I think that the sort of micro example that we'll give here kind of can represent the larger scope of what this collaboration was like. Third Coast collaborates as closely as we can with any composer we work with, but particularly when there's a composer like Tyondai who's generous with his time and willing to fly all the way to Chicago and, you know, sit patiently while we pull everything off the shelves and try it all out for him. Great. We really take advantage of that, and it always makes the music that much stronger. So, but people often ask how, you know, what does that look like? And there's actually an integral part of Sunny X, this new piece that Tyondai wrote for us, which is kind of almost the opening theme of the piece, which is a theme on originally written, I think, for wood blocks or temple blocks. And when Ty was here, we said, we've got these slabs of wood that really do look like little, you know, 2x4s or whatnot, but they're made of different materials, a maple or purple heart, a hard wood that has a really great resonant sound. And because of another project, we had been stacking them up, which you'll see in this video. And Ty had written these really fast rhythms, and I remember from the very beginning of us talking about this piece, Ty, you were like, I want to write stuff that's so fast that people can't believe you're actually doing it. And then you wrote stuff.
I love when these composers say that. I love when composers say that.
Well, then you wrote stuff that was so fast we couldn't actually do it.
Right. Yeah.
So the first video that I'll see here, the first little 30-second clip, is us trying to get there.
Mm.
And then because we're us and we spend all day, every day playing these instruments, we said, you know what, we can do this other thing, which is impossible to explain, but you'll see in the video, it's essentially a woodblock gliss. If you can imagine, if you can't imagine, just stay tuned and you'll get to see it. So here's a couple clips of us workshopping with Tyondai in our studio from last year. All right, so that's that little thing is so cool. It's something we've never done in any piece before. We would have never come up with on our own.
Cool.
But because we had them set up that way, we were like, what if you did this? And it's just, that's for us, for Third Coast, that's the thing that we just love, is getting someone creative in our studio to take these same objects that we really use in most of our pieces, but find a completely new way to use them.
That feels a little bit like the thing that makes, like, every percussionist I know, almost every percussionist I know kind of geeks out for the same thing, right? It's like trying to find like it's almost like this challenge that, you know, composers put forward to us, and like we solving that puzzle, you know, whether it's in a percussion quartet setting or solo percussionists or orchestral players, when, you know, whatever the composer, we got to find this symbol, and then you find that exact right symbol, or if you're a soloist, you know, that exact right, like, cowbell, and you see all these guys touring with everything, but you know, they only have to take that cowbell. They'll play on whatever marimba shows up in the hall, whatever bongos are there, right? You know, but like Steve Schick flies with that cowbell everywhere he goes, like an alphabet, or Third Coast travels with whatever little bundle of things that they need to make those sounds. And that, for me, as a player and as a teacher, is something that's really exciting to kind of, and is not lost, but is harder to express to other instrumentalists, that it's a sound and a concept a lot of times that we're trying to get, more than a specific, you know, it's a wood block. It's the essence of a wood block, not necessarily the Black Swamp 3-inch, whatever. So it's very cool. It's very cool. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I mean, and from my end, I would have never utilized that technique if I hadn't been able to go, you know, and sit with these guys and try these things out. I mean, that video that you saw, that was maybe like the first 15 minutes. Like, I didn't have anything written. We just showed up, and I just wanted to hear them play. I just wanted to hear the sounds of the instruments, you know what I mean? And, you know, and then it just starts sparking your, start sparking ideas, and you say, wait, hold on, let's isolate that. What is that? How can we, you know, just play that for a second? What if we did this? You know, it allowed me to kind of go down a rabbit hole that I would never have been able to go down otherwise. And I would just have written, you know, just based on the options that I have in my sample library and what I think a percussion ensemble is. And that's the nature of the percussion ensembles, that it's so customizable. It's so, it's such an abstract, you know, ensemble that it could really go anywhere. And to sit in front and hear those sounds, it's so specific to the group as well too. So it was a really great experience going out.
So speaking of customizable and abstract and really focused on sound, you've used the term modular synthesizer a couple of times, and I think that there's probably people watching who know way more about that than I do. But for those who are watching who don't know what a modular synthesizer is or have never seen one, could you give like a sort of a brief description? Because the electronic sounds that are part of this piece are created at least largely in a modular
Yeah.
synthesizer?
You would think I'd have like a really easy way to sum it up, but what a modular synthesizer is essentially, it's a sound generating machine comprised of small modules, each that have their own isolated function. They have their own little function, and when you patch them together by using wires, you can create a dialogue between these functions that ends up generating a sound that's very specific to the argument that these functions are having with each other. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. It looks kind of like an easel. You know, it looks like almost like a painting easel with all these like knobs and buttons, and you have kind of wires going to one thing and the next. When you think of synthesizers like from the 60s, you think of these walls of like, you know, these like strange walls of knobs and buttons and wires that, you know, come out of the walls. And it's kind of like that, except it's, you know, in this day and age, it's a lot, they're a lot smaller. They're a lot more, they're easier to manufacture. So you're having smaller kind of boutique companies create more risky and strange functions. And we're kind of like in an interesting era when it comes to modular synths and generative music right now, because it's been made more affordable and been made, I don't know, it's just maybe kind of in the water right now, where people are really kind of coming up with strange and risky instruments within that world.
The impression that I always get from, it's funny, I ask people what a modular synthesizer is. I've asked dozens of people over the past few years, and I always get an explanation that I understand while it's happening, but then if I had to tell someone else what it is, I still can't do it.
Well, and this is for me, it's such an amazing, it's totally made me rethink everything I have thought about music, in a good way, in a bad way, maybe in some ways. But it really has really made me question a lot of things. It's not like learning, you know, if you're a guitar player, it's not like switching over to playing a flute or even playing drums. It's a totally different way of thinking about music, because you're not necessarily playing it, or you're more kind of curating or administering the sound.
You sort of set things in motion. You
set things in motion, but I think maybe the most mind-blowing part of it to me is that my understanding of generative music was okay, you set up a system and then the thing just goes. But the thing that's actually pretty hard to grasp is that you could actually get good at generative music. You could actually find yourself. You could find your own artistic voice that you hear when you're playing an instrument hands-on. You could actually find that within the generative realm as well. And that's something that's kind of a strange thing to wrap your head around. But it's really just mastering a foreign language. It's learning a different language, and having to kind of play inside, you know, kind of master that sphere in order to be able to kind of find yourself in a kind of a foreign way.
I really love that idea of that it's music, you're creating music, but it's somehow completely divorced from, you know, when I thought of synthesizers before, I thought of modular synthesizers, I thought about this, you know,
right,
piano, keyboard, you know, Van Halen, or, you know,
sure,
just and the idea that this modular synthesizer is like, there is no keyboard. There are still tones, there are still pitches, but
there can be. I mean, that's the thing, is there can be keyboards. I mean,
I didn't even know that.
It's the kind of thing where it's like a percussion group. It's so customizable. No modular synth is the same. The one that I've built over these past couple of years, you know, no one has that exact one, because it's pieced together using things that I specifically want and need, and functions that I specifically, you know, want to be able to use in a specific way. So it's very open-ended, and it can be very intimidating too. It certainly was for me when I started, you know, trying to figure it out. But I was so interested in the sounds, because there's nothing quite like the sounds that those instruments can make. And so it's just taken me a long time to kind of, it takes you a long time to kind of wrap your head around it. And when you're headstrong like I am in like your creative process, and you want control, you demand control, and you try to implement your way of working onto something like that, it will fight you. It will resist every step, and to the point that you realize you have to understand it in order to go through it. In order to get what you want, you have to kind of, you have to speak its language in order to find yourself, as opposed to just trying to like push your will onto something like that.
I think it's so cool that what you just said really rhymes with something, John, you were saying earlier about the percussion world, where, for your piece, Tyondai, we're using our slabs of wood and parables that were specifically tuned for us in this by this artisan in Germany, and so on and so forth. All of these sounds that can be replicated by other ensembles, but would materially change the piece when someone else plays it. That's not us.
Yes.
And then you've got this modular synthesizer that you created these sounds for the piece on, and you're the only one in the world who has those sounds. So it just makes the piece so special, because it really is about your sound, and it is about our sounds.
Totally.
Together.
That's why we have to record this thing.
Yeah.
Gotta summit in posterity. It'll be the only version of its kind.
All right. Well, we have a special treat for everyone who's watching, which is we actually have a preview of the piece. Now this is it's a kind of a mock-up of the piece. So essentially it's some samples of our instruments. We, because of the current pandemic and extraordinary limits on my ensemble convening in this space to learn music, we haven't had a chance, as we had planned on, to learn Tyondai's piece yet. But because you're a master of the electronic music world, you've created this mock-up essentially that doesn't have some of the like raw grittiness that I'll have when we're performing it live, but is a great, interesting intro to the piece, and certainly has the modular sounds that we talked about. So I was thinking I'd roll that real quick. It's just a couple minutes excerpt from the very beginning of the piece and an excerpt from the middle of the piece.
Cool.
And then we'll have time to take questions. So if you're watching out there and you have a question for myself or Tyondai or John or anyone about anything, please drop those in the comments and we'll get to those. But for now, here is a exclusive preview of Tyondai Braxton's new piece, Sunny X. All right.
Cool. we do have a question in the comments here. Maybe we can go to that. So they give us a chance to talk about some of the other elements that I know are going to be part of this work besides the music that we're hearing. So one of the questions from Rick Davis: what kind of visual environment do you imagine supporting this piece?
I can speak to that first,
Yeah.
if you want. There's a huge component to this work that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet, which is that Tyondai's piece and another new piece by an artist named Jay Lynn, and some arrangements that Third Coast Percussion is doing of a work by Philip Glass will be a part of an evening linked presentation that will include choreography. So there'll be movement choreographed by a company called Movement Art Is, which is comprised of Lil Buck and John Boogs, two amazing movement artists and choreographers. And so of course that will be a huge part of the visual presentation of the piece. In addition to that, we've got a lighting designer that we're hiring to sort of also help sort of frame the piece and sort of set the listening environment for everyone. But I will say that percussion music just in general has a real visual element to it. I wonder if that was something that you were thinking of, Ty. Were you sort of focused specifically on sounds, or is there any sort of thinking about the movement of the performers that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely went into writing this knowing that there was going to be a dance element to it. I just so happened to be, I was kind of like on a kick listening to really kind of manic electronic music, and I think that kind of figured into portions of the piece at least. So I felt like that would probably be able to translate well for dance. Yeah, I mean, you know, even when you're engaging with a percussion ensemble in a kind of textural way, it's still applicable to dance. You don't necessarily have to ride the rhythm too obviously to be able to, like, you know, create a sense of movement within the piece. But there's definitely some pretty obvious propulsive elements to something like Sunny X.
And of course, there's just an endless list of great percussion music, and I mean more broadly, of course, but percussion music written to be, you know, collaborated with in terms of dance in a huge range of ways. So this piece will join a wonderful stream of works and add to that in a huge way. Yeah. And I think in a pretty new way, you know, I mean, I think in another, it'll take it down another avenue in terms of that type of collaboration. You know, one of the things, and one other question here, but I want to just talk a little bit about another topic just for a second. When we talk about commissions and consortium commissions, which this is a piece that's being brought to life by Third Coast with different partners that are joining to host and have subsequent performances of the work. And, you know, for me, the value of, and all of us should talk about this as much as we want, but for me, the value of consortium commissions is that it allows, as a, you know, I'm sure as a composer, it allows hopefully for multiple performances and theoretically multiple performances in different geographic areas, whether it's a work for one ensemble that tours as much as Third Coast does, or, and, you know, the band world has this down to a T. You know, they will get like 50 bands to give $10 or something like that, and they get, you know, these giant commission, but then the composer of that music will get, you know, dozens of performances over the first couple of years, all in different areas. The thing I think that's even more interesting about this particular commission, if I can just, you know, pat myself on the back, but is that there's so many different organizations that have very different audiences and geographic areas. So not only, but we're talking about, you know, a summer audience, and obviously the Carnegie Hall audience, and a New York-based, you know, group of folks that'll hear it in one aesthetic, and then what we'll do at Mason and the student audience and the community here that, you know, will have a different reaction to it. And I'm just curious for the two of you to kind of expand on that a little bit. But for me, it's really exciting that, and I know there'll be many other performances that Third Coast will do of this work over many years. So I don't want to limit it to that, but to be able to say that a new work is going to have multiple performances to multiple audiences and hopefully bring it into the repertoire is for me really powerful. So I just would love to hear you guys talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll sign you. Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, first of all, as a composer, it's such an incredible opportunity to be able to, have something that you could sit and craft, and then know that it's going to be able to have a life kind of around, different venues, different places in the country and the world. It's a great feeling to know that that's the model. And it's a commission with a kind of a multi-organizational push behind it. I think is I think it's a great model, and I think it allows for a bunch of opportunity and allows for multiple engagement with these different entities being able to kind of like have their stake in it. So yeah, I think it's great, and I'm always grateful to be able to have write something like that for a situation like this.
Yeah, and I would just love to take a moment to say thank you to the George Mason community, Sewanee Music Festival, Carnegie, because it's they're everyone's chipping in to make this project possible, and for us to have Ty's time set aside to write us a great piece, and for us to have the time to set it aside and learn it and play it. And for anyone who's watching who's unfamiliar with the commissioning process, or if this is something that's a little bit new, like if you think about just classical music, and this, you can apply this to any different art form, but if you think about just classical music, Haydn string quartets exist because of the patronage of his supporters in his time. And that was a time of, royalty and
Right.
different financial models.
Courts and kings, yeah.
Totally. But, Bartók's orchestra works exist because they were commissioned by individuals and organizations. And you can extrapolate that to composers, Bartók, all the way till today. So commissioning new work is a real act of generosity and bravery, because you just literally say, I like this artist, I like this group. What if they did something together? Neither George Mason nor Carnegie nor Sewanee said, okay, Tyondai, it's got to be this kind of piece and it's got to sound like this. And you literally say, you're an artist that we respect. Create whatever feels real to you right now. Right. And that trust in artists is what leads to all the great works that exist in the world.
Yeah. You're here.
We have some more questions. You guys are seeing the questions too, right? Or should I read through them?
We've got a couple more. I don't see them right now.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, now I feel even more important than if I control the questions. We have one talking about sound. To Tyondai, when you're thinking of sound, are you mainly going off sounds you've heard and maybe trying to recreate, as you discussed, going through Third Coast Studio, or are the sounds more sort of in your head and then you're trying to find something that matches that, or is it a mixture of both? So your creative process when it comes to sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of a mixture of both. Again, when you're thinking in terms of generative music, when it comes to modular synth or something like that, yes, you do think in sound, and you think in where you'd like to kind of arrive at as far as like a particular sound, but you're thinking in shape, and you're thinking in function, and you're thinking in, the longevity of a sound as far as how it could develop over time. It's usually not just like a single sound. You're usually kind of weaving like kind of a sonic tapestry, and so you're kind of thinking, how could, not only am I thinking of the sound, how could it evolve? How could it, change shape over time where it feels like it's successfully realized as a sound that feels alive, if that makes sense. I know I'm starting that might sound kind of abstract, but, and then you think, well, how do I have that interface with a group that does have more of a, coming from fixed notation? How do I have those two worlds combined? So, yes, you, in some ways you have an idea, but also, of course, you you try things out and you stumble upon something, you say, oh, that's kind of cool. And what if I just kind of see that through the end? In the same way that when I went to meet with Third Coast, I kind of had a preconceived idea of what I'd like to do, or I had some ideas. But then when you're sitting in front of these guys and these instruments, and you kind of are able to kind of interact and you know, try things out, invariably you're gonna come to like different conclusions. You're gonna go down a path that you might not have originally planned for. So I try to leave room. I try to leave room for a little bit of exploration, while at the same time having some semblance of an idea.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. That's awesome. We've got two. Sorry, I tried to be more articulate, but it's so we've got two more questions in here that I think we definitely want to hit. One from Aaron Emery, and he says, "Hi, Tyondai." So I don't know if there's a connection there. What's your advice on first steps for starting on modular synthesis? So first steps into that journey into that world for us.
I want to know that too. So.
Yeah, actually, yeah, definitely.
Well, it's funny because I was like looking at videos online and stuff maybe like 10 years ago, and was just like really like, wow, the results that you get with this thing, it's just awesome, and it's something I really would love to do. How do I do that? I got very lucky. I got lucky in the sense that this is funny. In living in Brooklyn, so, you know, in Williamsburg, 2 blocks away from my house, maybe the premier modular synth shop of the East Coast opened up, maybe 2 blocks away from me, called Control. Incredible store, great store. And I was lucky in that, you know, I would be able to go there and try things out, and the staff and the people that opened the shop and who work there were very generous, very kind. It's a very very kind community. And I just learned through them, and I bought maybe a couple of modules, and it was just trial and error. I mean, there's no way to know what you're doing initially. Like I would say you have to kind of have like a basic, get it like a you know, call somebody and get like a basic idea of what you're looking for, and maybe have like a shop or something put together like a very crude set, just so you can just get it in your ear and get it on your hands and just like mess around with it, so you actually know what the thing is. Over the period of maybe 7 years at this point, I've bought and sold a bunch of modules. It's a real trial and error kind of a thing. You probably could do better than I did, because I was, again, I'm a control freak, and I'm headstrong, and I try to like I want to find it myself, you know, so I probably wasted a lot of time. Whereas if I asked more questions and was maybe more inquisitive, I probably could have got to some of these places sooner. But my recommendation is, if you know someone that knows this stuff, talk to them. If you don't, maybe you know, there's software that you could use and stuff, but it's really not the same. You really have to just have your hand on it, and it really is kind of like an aha moment. So save up a little bit of money, buy a crude, you know, couple of modules that don't do all the things you want to do, and just start to just feel what it is and how it works, and you just slowly start adding on, you know, over time. That's my best advice.
That's great.
Yeah.
No, it's good, and I think, and there's one more question, but I would just add to that more generally. Nothing about modular synthesis.
Yeah.
I could not add one word about that, but we were talking about this before we went live, and maybe as we wrap up, we can look to the future a little bit and address this. But you know, right now is a really interesting time to put it. Maybe not interesting is not the right word. An opportune time to learn something you might not be able to learn, right? So, well, here's a chance to do that. And there's one more question here about music, but I want to make sure we kind of get to that conversation about what the heck we're all doing right now, why we're not having this discussion, you know, on a stage together.
It's a really crazy time. This will go down in our collective history as one of the most challenging social issues that hopefully we'll ever face. But from an artistic standpoint, I could say this, at least from a composition standpoint, and from if you want to learn a new instrument. To be perfectly honest, a lot of people are hermetic by nature that are composers. Myself, my actual day-to-day hasn't changed too much as far as how I work. I'm alone a lot. I'm with my family, but for the most part, how I create things, it's usually by myself. So, and when it comes to something like, synthesizer or being an instrumentalist and stuff, just being able to kind of keep engaged in that way and be creative, I think, not only is healthy, but it's also essential for an artist right now as we kind of try collectively kind of navigate through this experience. I wonder, I'm sure there's different challenges for people that aren't so insular and can't work so easily just by walling up in the studio at home. Like, I know David that's a quartet that he's working inside of with Third Coast, and I'm sure that presents its own challenges.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. But I think that we're uniquely fortunate as a quartet of musicians. We need the four of us to be together to make our music. We've done a few things remotely from our homes, with the type of videos that you've seen where there's like Brady Bunch style screens and that sort of thing. And actually, you can do really fun and creative stuff that way. But we're uniquely fortunate. We have this rehearsal studio, and the four of us plus our studio manager, Colin, who runs microphones and cameras for us when we do live streams.
Shout out to Colin.
Shout out to Colin, who's right there. He's amazing. He literally learned how to do this stuff over a weekend. Not kidding. And the five of us have only seen each other and our families since this all went down. It's been 2 months now. So we've kind of closed our circle, and that's allowed us to feel safe about coming together once every week, once every 2 weeks for a live stream event. Obviously, it's just me in the studio today with Colin, but there are times when the four of us gather and give live stream performances. But we very much miss playing in front of an audience. Yeah. But we also are pragmatic. We don't know when that's when that's going to be possible. We hope it's possible very soon. We hope to see you all, George Mason University audience, this fall. And we remain hopeful that that'll be possible. But in the meantime, I would just echo the sentiment that for those who are, first of all, in a position to be able to have time to themselves, because some people are taking care of families or some people have to work, and
for sure.
But for those who have the other problem of like, what am I going to do with all this time? It's a unique opportunity. Perhaps I don't know that there'll be another time when someone says, "Don't leave your house for months on end. Don't see anyone else." What are you going to do? Well, you could do a lot of things, but if you feel up for it, you could learn modular synthesizer. You could learn an instrument.
Right. Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah. There's one question about art in here that I want to get us to talk about before we just, and then anything else as we wrap up our time together.
Sure.
And I'm being a little selfish with this question because it comes from one of my graduate students, so I want to make sure that he gets his question. Cool. So the question was about George Crumb. You mentioned Tyondai. You mentioned Varese as an influence, and
sure.
Michael's wondering if George Crumb may have also played a role in influencing your music, and I actually would expand the question since I can, and David, ask you to talk about Crumb a little bit in terms of your work as a percussionist, either with Third Coast or other things. I know for me, I played a lot of his music. I've coached a lot of his music. I accidentally played his music for him. I didn't know he was in the audience until I walked out on stage to play one of his pieces, and somebody pulled me aside and said, "By the way, George Crumb is there, so make sure you acknowledge him after Idle for the Misbegotten," which was a slightly terrifying moment to realize when I was relatively young. Anyway, so the question is George Crumb. So
I think one of the earliest pieces of his that I became aware of was as an undergrad, the Black Angels piece that he did. This kind of microtonal. I think that introduced to me like the depths of microtonal music, or at least that was my introduction to an approach like that. And it's just philosophically, thinking about sound in that way between him and Varese, and the idea of, just kind of going to the outer edges of what it means to organize sound in that way, in different ways, was really thrilling to me early on. I didn't know how to use a lot of that influence at first. I didn't know how to assimilate a lot of those ideas into my own world at first, and it took some time of getting comfortable in what I was doing and the areas that I was going in, where I started to kind of like reach out beyond my circle as well. And it's a credit to people like Crumb and Varese and Morton Feldman, who is another person who I'm deeply influenced by. And I think philosophically, it's the explorer mentality, the idea of reaching outwards and going into the dark and trying to find yourself. It's an exciting journey, and you could feel it when someone's doing it. You could see it when someone's doing it, and that's something that will always move me.
Awesome. David, did you want to touch on anything with Crumb here?
I mean,
no pressure, but he's George Crumb, so
Well, better say something.
Yeah.
I feel like there are two types of composers. I feel like there's a composer who writes music that is easily adapted to other instruments, and two examples that come to mind are Philip Glass and Bach. Glass's music is often arranged for other instruments and works beautifully. And you can play Bach cello suites on marimba or contrabass or what have you. And then there are composers like, I would put in this category, George Crumb, who just create sounds for instruments that could really only be created on those instruments. And they create magic with those instruments. And of course, I think specifically of percussion, but Crumb asks percussionists to do things in his pieces that create otherworldly sounds that you just could never imagine. And in fact, it's an amazing listening experience to not watch, but just listen to George Crumb and just try and imagine where these sounds are coming from. It's something as simple as playing a vibraphone and whistling along with it, which is one of many techniques that Crumb uses in his pieces. It's really magical, and it changes everything after it, because then people, as they should do, borrow those ideas. And not for nothing, but I would put Tyondai in exactly that same category, because I feel like and we talked about this with your piece, but you've got a modular synthesizer that is and you're setting percussion sounds in your works that are you, and you couldn't take the piece that you wrote for a Sonny X and play it on the piano.
Right.
It really absolutely is it makes absolutely no sense to even think about that.
That is true.
To me, that's special. It's cool. It makes it feel cool that, yes, this is a percussion piece. We're a percussion ensemble, and we own this, and it's uniquely ours.
Right. Yeah. Circling back to the idea of a commission and the importance of commissions and how to facilitate something like this, you can't do a deep dive like that unless you have the resources to be able to kind of come and interface with a group like you guys and be able to kind of forge some of these, or find some of these relationships within the sound and with the players as well. You wouldn't be able to do that unless you had a situation that would facilitate something like that. Which is why when you usually don't, you do have to kind of, you're composing maybe more based on your understanding of something, or kind of maybe more superficially or not superficially, so, whatever your understanding of something is. But to be able to have a situation facilitated where you're able to do some deep dives, where you're able to kind of get hyper customizable in the way that you're writing, is a great opportunity. So I'm glad to be able to write a piece like this for you guys.
Well, gentlemen, I think we could probably do another hour of this, but I suspect we get in trouble. So I think we should wrap up. I'm grateful to have been a part of this, and to have listened to the two of you talk about this, the Sonny X and the commission. And I'm really excited for what I know we'll be able to do in the fall, and I'm just going to pretend that we're all going to be together in the fall and everything's going to be fine. Is that meme, man? You know, with the fire behind me and the dog holding the coffee cup, like everything's fine.
Yeah.
But all, you know, gallows humor aside, should we have what we know we can have in the fall, it's going to be an extraordinary opportunity to collaborate for our students to see you guys and to experience the collaboration. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I hope everyone that's tuned in has a chance to check out future Mason Arts at Home programming. And for all of you within anywhere near the Center for the Arts next fall, when we will have Third Coast here and present this and other works on their concert, we're really, really looking forward to that. So Tyondai, David, thank you both for being here, and stay safe and good luck with everything you're doing for all the creative works you're doing. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.